Do you like philosophy? Do you have questions about life, the universe, and everything else? Well, you're in luck because today's episode, we're going to be covering 10 of apparently the biggest philosophical questions. We're going to be answering all of them, so you'll have no more questions after this episode. This is the Essential Stoic Podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. What's going on, Danny?
What's up, Randy? Yeah, you'll be able to sleep easy knowing you have the answers to the most difficult questions, you know?
The answers to it all. I mean, people have been trying to solve these questions for thousands of years, and we're just going to probably in like a half an hour or less, we're going to answer them all.
Knock them out.
Yeah. Why why waste all that time? So
Thinking
without
about
further
it.
without further ado, let's get into it.
All
First
right.
one, a really easy question. What's the meaning of life?
It is an easy question, right?
I think it was
I
best answered in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah, pretty much, right? 42,
Hmm.
the big question, answered everything,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's tough. I think this one, I think there's a lot. I think you can find a lot of answers to the meaning of life from outside, but I don't think they actually exist. I think you have to make it yourself. It's really life is about living and being alive, right? Being conscious. And so through living, we discover things about ourselves, things about the world, and I think we have to sort of make the meaning ourselves. I don't think it'll ever be fulfilling if it's sought from outside sources.
Yeah. And it could be, it's one of those things where it's like the meaning of life. Why is it only one meaning
Yeah.
of life? I mean, there could be tons of meanings, or it could just be like, maybe it doesn't need a meaning because it seems like life goes on whether or not there's a meaning anyways. So why do we need to assign a meaning to it?
So I always liked about, when Camus says, we always ask these big questions, but the universe forever remains silent. Like it doesn't provide an answer. And I think that's true. Like the only answers we're going to get are from human beings and us
Hmm.
answering these questions. It's not like, the universe is going to be like, hey, guess what? It's this, you know?
Right. We're the only ones who care about this stuff. It's not like a river stops and it's like, oh no, what's the meaning of life? It just
Well,
does.
that's kind of the bitch of consciousness, isn't it? It's like that double-edged sword where like other animals are not worried about this. I mean, they're definitely conscious, but they're probably at a much low, like, it's not as whatever. They don't worry about all these big problems because it's not
Well, it's
sophisticated.
like consciousness, it's consciousness's form of masturbation. Because consciousness in itself can't masturbate, it has to like assign meaning to stuff and say that it's important.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And dwell on all these big questions. All
Yeah.
right.
So that was easy.
Yeah.
Next one. Is there a God?
Well, that's a tough one. I would say, uh, I would lean, no. Well, definitely not what everybody thinks, I don't think. I don't think God's some specific entity. I think if there is anything like that, it's like some cosmic thing that we will run into eventually, maybe, or it's something that's inherent in the system itself. I kind of like Heraclitus talks about the logos, the underlying, laws that govern reality, that kind of thing. I like that approach personally. Because
Mhm.
I don't think there's any deity that created everything or, it's on the outside looking in, especially not in the way religions usually tend to construe God.
Blasphemy.
Yeah.
But I think you're on like I agree with you there where I mean there's all these it just doesn't make sense that there's all these different religions that have all these different gods and it's like one's right and all the other ones are wrong. That just
I
doesn't make
know.
sense. But like if you look at it kind of from a step back, they're all pointing in a general direction. They're all like pointing in the direction of, like be good, have a good life, that type of thing. And so maybe it's just not exactly a god like some dude with a big beard sitting on a chair in a cloud, but potentially it's just this is the way things are in the universe, and potentially this way of living could help you enjoy your time here a little bit better.
Yeah, well, I think that's it. Most religions, right? They have pretty similar basic principles to follow because, it's about interacting and living together and being decent. And I think that's pretty much, the important stuff from it. The God
Yeah,
itself is, yeah, I think God could be anything. So depending on the person, so it's tough. Yeah. All right.
absolutely. So
Two's
that's
down.
two down, super fast. Three, what is the nature of reality?
Ugh, this one's tough.
Well, I'll go first.
All right.
So reality is basically just what is.
Yeah, I agree.
Essentially. And, we spend so much time caught up in the future and in the past that we very rarely actually experience reality. You know, only when like these oftentimes when terrible things happen or when like we just have like this, you know, you catch like a beautiful sunset or something and all of a sudden you stop thinking about the future and the past and you like actually just are like, wow, this is awesome that you actually experience reality. So reality is just whatever's here now. And it's kind of one of those things where like this is one of those questions that I think people ask when they're in the wrong state because they usually ask this thing when they want to change whatever is.
Yeah.
You know, they're like,
Mm.
what's the nature of reality so that I can control it? But it's very difficult to control reality, if not
Yeah,
impossible.
yeah, I like that answer. I think that's true. Like, I think we get a clear sense of it when we're in the moment. But those are really rare instances. I think you're right. It's funny, like I remember like I was sitting at a red light one time in a car. This guy jumped the median, literally jumped the median and slammed in the car that I was in. And I remember I turned my head and saw him coming, and like it was like time slowed down. It was so weird. I had so much time like in between. It felt like it was probably like 2 seconds, but it felt like a solid minute. It was weird. And it's so weird how time slows down so much when we're in those moments, or conversely can also speed up. It's really strange. Like you see a cool sunset and you're like, wow, and then like it happens really fast. And it's very weird how that like I don't know, that perception of
Yeah.
time is so strange.
Yeah, time is one of those weird things. Like when you were talking about that, I was just thinking back when I was a child, driving to my grandparents' house was like the longest thing ever because they lived 2 hours. It was 2 hours away. Now I drive 2 hours and I don't even think about it. But like back then, 2 hours was like the longest eternity of
Yeah.
time. And so yeah, time is kind of all relative.
Yeah, it is. But I agree. The nature of reality, I think, is tough. I think, it's one of those questions that's like, it's also like, well, what do you mean by that? But yeah, I think I like that, we live in the present. That's all we have. We get
Mhm.
caught up in the future and past. We tend not to be there. So yeah, I agree. That's nice.
Well, being that we answered that one, here's another big one. Do we have free will?
Ah, this is such a tough one. I know. It's like,
Yeah, and prove it.
yeah, right.
Do
And
we have free will and prove it?
show me on paper with all your things. I think, I've thought about this one a lot, and I think people mean different things by free will. So like there is that older notion of free will that's like free will in that like metaphysical sense where you literally like we have the ability to like start a new chain of actions kind of like step outside of like the already existing chain of causality and start a new one. I don't think that's the case. What I think we do have is I think we have like consciousness gives us a certain freedom where we can make choices and decide things. And maybe not all the time do we exercise free will, but like there's cases where we're in, especially like big decisions where we choose something that sort of sets our course, our life, or how we're seeing things or perceiving things. And that's where our freedom, I think, lies. Like it's our freedom to interpret things, tell our own story, and our freedom to kind of like in big moments make a decision that might, set us on a course, kind of.
Agree with you 100% there. I have a question about it though. So you know how like all day we just have these thoughts going through our head that we did not ask for. We didn't plan them, we didn't think them. They just kind of come through. Well, but then sometimes we think that we think certain thoughts. So like this idea of free will, we think, no, this was my idea. This was my thought that came through, as opposed to just these other random thoughts that go through my head. What if it's not?
Well, that's one of the funny things you mentioned that Nietzsche has a part of his, I can't remember which book, but he talks about how like, you know, we confuse, the sequence of events and causality is very complex. Like with thoughts, we think we have these ideas, but in reality, like a lot of them, no, they just kind of like pop up for whatever reason. It might be like, smell something, whatever. There's all these different causal factors in there. But we're subject to experience in the world. So it is the easier position is for us to think of ourselves as free, right? As having control, because it makes sense. You're operating in the world. It gives us that sense of responsibility and all. So I don't know. Yeah, it's tough. I don't know if we like even our ideas you can truly say are like ours.
Mhm.
But I do think like I think a good place to look at freedom is like when we look back on our lives and we reinterpret things, we see things differently, we tell our own story. That's a good place where I think we exercise our freedom. Because we're like deciding what our narrative is, basically, right? We're not
Yeah.
necessarily doing anything for
And
either
also
world.
looking forward to a future and kind of imagining a future to
Yeah,
change our course. Yeah.
yeah. But
I
I
mean, I
think it
definitely believe that. I can convince myself that I've made changes in my life that
Yeah,
have
right.
altered my reality. Yeah, but who knows?
Yeah, it's really about free will. It's all it is really just convincing ourselves that we have free will after the
Yeah,
fact.
pretty much. That was me. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Cool. So the next one, another easy question. What is consciousness?
I like this
This
one.
one, yeah, this one, my answer to this question has changed a lot in the past 3 years.
Oh
Like
yeah,
almost
let's
completely.
let's hear it.
Because with ChatGPT and the kind of not invention, but the proliferation of all of this AI that we have, the generative text, I almost think that consciousness is just kind of guessing the next word, essentially.
Oh,
Because
like
for the most
intelligence
part,
is just being good at guessing the next word. Yeah.
and consciousness too, because like for instance, if you just somehow landed into today's time and you didn't know about AI, and all of a sudden you were on a phone call with an AI bot
Oh yeah.
and you had a conversation, and afterwards someone asked you, was that person conscious? You would probably say, yeah,
Yeah, probably.
you know?
Yeah, that's
So
true.
like
Yeah.
I think it's kind of just like predictive ability, like predicting the next word that's going to come up, essentially.
That kind of makes, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense though, because on the one hand, like if you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint and all, like predicting would be a high skill and a high value, right? Being able to predict either a danger or an enemy correctly, right? Or like, being able to make the right choice, like just about basic things, like being able to,
You can even see that nowadays with people who can't read a room. You know, they're like
yeah.
essentially they just can't predict stuff and it causes a huge disruption.
Huh. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's interesting. I like that. Yeah, I was gonna say too, like my idea of it has changed a lot too. I think it's definitely synthetic. It's something that's created from living. So it's from our experience that we make this, which is why I think like, when our brain's still forming when we're young, nobody has memories from really young. Like, 0 to basically like 4 or 5, nobody has memories. And I think that's because, brain's still forming. We haven't gotten to the point where like we're starting to catalog and build those experiences. But as we start to have experiences and start to build them, the subjective I is something synthetic that's created from that sort of accumulation of experiences. It's like a centering. It's a way to center, which is why we have continuity over time, even though really we change a lot over time. Yeah, it's something that we
Yeah.
just kind of is created from that act of living and experiencing.
So then I guess then the question is, do you need to have an eye in order to have consciousness? And in that case, do animals have consciousness? Do plants have consciousness?
Well, the I then in that case would come after the fact, right? Well, it's like part of the process, I guess, right? It builds synthetically from the process of experiencing. So I think you could say like anything with like a moderate level of like awareness has it. So I would say most animals probably do have some level of consciousness, not as complex as ours, because a big part of ours too is also the memory, right? The ability
Hmm.
to kind of connect all those things over a long period of time and kind of like, yes, I think that helps us have a more complex consciousness, I guess.
Yeah, I'll buy
Seems
it.
reasonable, right? Why not?
Yeah, yeah. So next one, what is the basis of morality? And has morality just gone out the window in the past decade
I
since
mean,
Enron?
yeah, pretty much. In terms of
Yeah.
like society, yeah, it's a mess. I know. It is a mess. I, you
What
know,
is the basis? What is what I mean, what is essentially what are morals and where does it
well, I
come
think
from,
when they say
morality?
basis, I think what they're saying in this question is like, because a lot of people think like for a long time people thought, and some people still do, I think, that you can't really have morality without like say religion or something, because you need an authority, a God to like have that to give that foundation, right? So that it has
Hmm.
some strength. I don't think you need that. I think morality is
Oh,
just something that like, you know, it's something we can decide to or do live by, right? It's an idea of just values and a distinction between good and bad values and trying to live aligned with those good values. But I think it's something that we have to also create, right? Because
yeah.
it
And
has to
it's
be something
something
we
that's going to be
align with.
different for different people.
Yeah.
But I think it kind of points in the same direction.
Yeah, well,
You know?
I don't think the actions are, I mean, I don't think the overall like what they consider right and wrong is so different. I think it's just the reasons why, right, might differ. But like the
Hmm.
general actions, like most, think most people are going to say like, killing other people is wrong, right? In most cases.
Right, but
Or like,
killing somebody to save yourself, that's probably
yeah,
right.
yeah, exactly,
So
right?
it's one of those things where it points in the direction. Stealing is wrong, but stealing so you can survive, maybe that's right.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think morality is so tough, right? Is why we never, I think that's the biggest mistake we make. We've gotten to the point now where people think of morality more as a way to like judge others, but it's really never was meant for that. It's meant for you to like, it's you to live better and be a better person, however the hell you define that, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of our problem. We use it too much as a subjective way of judging, but it's not.
And also we get caught in these arguments over edge cases. It's kind
Yeah.
of like a bell curve. Like 80% of morality, everybody will probably agree on, but there's 10% on each side that people are arguing about as if that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I always liked, well, Aristotle always, he said, like, when it comes to like we need to in the common key ethics it says like we need to be aware of like what we're aiming at relative to the subject matter. So like mathematics, we want precise answers. But he said with when it comes to ethics, you really are only looking for what generally holds most of the time because you can't account for everything. It's just
Hmm.
impossible. Because you're talking about human action and human interrelationships and stuff like that. So there's always going to be outliers. There's always going to be edge cases. There's always going to be, extremes. But maybe we don't need to actually deal with all of those because they're so rare and far between.
Absolutely. Great answer. So next one, what is the nature of happiness?
Ugh, happiness, right?
Yeah.
Getting all the stuff you want.
Yeah. Sheer ecstasy all the time. I think this is a ridiculous one because we've definitely corrupted happiness. I think partially I would partially blame the advertising industry for this, marketing, the advertising
Oh, hell
industry,
yeah.
because they make it seem like you're supposed to be happy all the time, and if you're not, it's because you lack something. But I don't think you're supposed to be happy all the time. Maybe you can kind of aim towards being peaceful or content, but happiness is like I don't think because like you can't be happy when someone you love dies.
No,
Like you're not gonna, I mean, maybe at the best you'll feel like bittersweet, where it's like you can remember the good times you had and you're still sad, but like that's kind of the best emotion you can have. But this idea of like happiness all the time is ridiculous. And especially nowadays where we have lots of cases of anxiety and depression. I mean, this is like a clear warning that something is going wrong in these people's
yeah.
lives and they shouldn't be happy because the anxiety and depression says something very beautiful about them, but they need to figure out what that is.
No, yeah, I agree. And I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Like, and I fell on that trap too when I was younger. Like, I think everybody did because of TV, because of ads, because of like the way, the happily ever after crap movies and stuff like that. Like, we thought of happiness as like this mythical, like sort of abstract thing. Eventually, you just somehow achieve, and then
Yeah,
you're
the end
good.
state. If you do everything right, you live
Yeah,
happily ever
but like we
after.
never like, but nobody ever clarified like what that meant or anything. And the reality is like you said, right? Like life is gonna have ups and downs. There's no way getting around that. There's gonna be good days and bad days. And I think happiness is like it's more about having like I would say like a balance, an internal balance, so that you're better equipped to deal with those ups and downs, so they don't throw you
Hmm.
off. Like you said, like,
Hmm.
look, somebody's gonna die. Now, a person's death, a loved one's death, could be something that totally derails you, or it could be something that you deal with in a healthy way, and I think a happiness is kind of like I like the old kind of like notion of like the good life or like eudaimonia, right? It's like we should aim at something where like overall things are better because we've worked on ourselves. But that's not really like this elation that I think most people think of happiness today. And I think that's really, problematic because it gives you this really weird idea of what life is.
Yep. And especially because the biggest impediment to happiness is wanting to be happy or trying to be happy. Like that's the biggest killer of happiness, that right there. Once you
Yeah.
kind of aim for contentment and just be okay with things how they are, and you know, then things generally are better.
Well, it's that problem too of like if we can't be happy in the process, what's the point? Because like, I think that's the other thing. We make happiness like so much people connect it to like, oh, if I just get this or achieve that, then I'll be happy. But like not really, because you haven't changed, and like that thing's not going to just magically fix all the things in your life. So it's
Hmm.
like, I think that's also the other thing is we have to think more about like, how can I be happier now in the process of living rather than, waiting for some time in the future, undisclosed, when things are just magically better.
Yeah, because the future never appears, and then when that thing finally does appear, you might be content for a day or something like that, but things don't make you
Yeah.
happy.
No,
Yeah,
no.
cool. So, what is the purpose of existence? Why do we exist?
Yeah, why do we exist? Good question. Why
hmm
are we here? What is going on? Somebody explain
I
it.
would go back to saying there is no purpose. We just like I think it's just one of those things where like something was created and it's just like okay, it just is.
Yeah, I mean, it is just, right? That's it. It is just this. It's this. This is it. There's no
hmm
real purpose because like everything, the funny thing about that too is like to assume that there's a purpose would assume there's like an end goal or something because it's like otherwise like if in whatever how many billion years the sun gets huge and the earth gets destroyed and there's no humanity left, let's say, right? Then all those things that we did don't matter anyway at that point. It's like it only matters when there's a human, somebody around to see it, to observe it, to understand it. So yeah, I don't think
hmm
there is a purpose. I think it just is. And we make, again, it's like meaning, right? We make the purpose. And it's kind of sad that like, we can't, humanity as a whole can't seem to like figure things out and we're constantly like destroying stuff and each other. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like a disorder. I forget how it was described, but it's kind of like disorder on top of order. You have everything kind of working in the background. Like the earth just kind of like keeps on going and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The days come and go, the tides move and everything like that. But on top of that, you have all this crazy chaos and disorder and all these things and wars going on and people dying and disease and and markets and all these different things going on. But on the back, at the end of it, it's just kind of, you know, on
But
top
that's
of
all
this
stuff
big
we
thing of
make
order.
up. That's the funny thing. It's all those constructs we're putting on top of everything. It's all
What
that
do
that screws
you
everything up.
remember? You remember during COVID when like people were locked in their houses and all of a sudden the world got better? Like
Dude,
people
really
could see,
fast.
yeah, like smog went away. People could see mountains for the first time. Animals started coming
Dude,
out.
I
Like,
remember reading, there was one report I remember reading that was like, there was this city, I think it was in India, where like, for the first time in 30 years, they could see the mountains in the distance. And I was like, that is crazy. Like, you could have been 29 years old and never knew there was mountains out in
yeah,
the distance. And all of a sudden you can see them because the smog
that's
finally
insane.
cleared. Like, that's
That's
nuts.
insane, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then a couple years later, back to the status quo.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the next one. What's the nature of truth? Malcolm X would love this question because he definitively knew what truth was.
No, you hated that book.
Yeah, I know, right? Uh,
Well, I should
I
say
just
you hated
want
the
to.
book. You hated his sort of
Well,
obsession with the fact that he thinks he
I
knew.
just found it hard to read because he was very, very adamant that he knew the truth for everybody, and
Yeah. Yeah,
I
I don't
was
like
like,
that.
that's cool, but probably not.
It's one of those things where I think you probably need to think that way to do kind of like what he did to
hmm
invest yourself in it like that. But it's also a problematic situation to be in. Yeah. Because it's
Yeah,
like,
well, I'm sure some precedent that many people aren't too fond of right now thinks that he knows the truth for everybody too.
yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
It's like, it's that kind of like mentality. Yeah. Truth is tough. It's like, again, I don't think there is like objective truth. I don't think, there's like, there's truths that we have like there's common things that we can believe in because of culture, community, things like that. But I think truth is something that again we create. Human beings do a lot of work here. Thinking does a lot of work. And so it's a matter of like, agreement. It's a matter of, deciding that this works for us, it's a matter of a lot of things, but it's not something that has like some reality outside of humanity.
hmm Yeah, I don't think there's a single truth. There may not even be lots of truths
No.
because, like, one person is the truth for one person can be completely different from the truth for somebody else. Like the same thing can happen to two people, and they can have completely different truths based on that. So I think truth is one of these things that is almost worthless.
Well, it's like I always like, Socrates said the only thing I know is that I know nothing, right? That
hmm
like it's like the more you pursue these truths, the more you realize that they're sort of ephemeral, not really there, and kind of, it depends
It's a
on the
good
person.
That's a good point. Like maybe it's not as important to know the truth, but maybe it's more important to know what is BS,
Well,
you
that's
know? To
you
have a
know,
good BS meter.
and I think that's well, I think that's too. Like I think pursuing knowledge and stuff is a good thing because the more you do, the more you open your mind to different things, different experiences, different ways of looking at the world, the more you also realize that it's we make it. And then it makes you more open-minded, but also less likely to buy into these things and less likely to get fixated on certain truths, right? And or like get kind of led by the crowd to think a certain way. And I think that's definitely better in the long term, you
Hmm.
know? Yeah.
Yep. Which brings us to our last question, which I have a question, which what does it mean? But what is the nature of identity?
That's a tough
Yeah.
one. Like this one,
What is it?
this one's hard because I feel like I, I always liked I always liked like Taoism or Heraclitus or a lot of the philosophies that look at everything as interconnected and interrelated. Where like,
Hmm.
you have you can look at all existence as one thing
Mm.
that's comprised that then you can also look at all these many things that together make up that one thing. Because if you think about it, like nothing, everything is only definable in relation to its to other things. Its place, its role,
Yeah.
and so I think identity is tough because it's like we make all these identity distinctions because we think of ourselves as a subject, and it's easy to look at things that way, but maybe they're
Hmm.
not right, if everything's, yeah.
But you make a great point. Like being a human or whatever is kind of a paradox because at one point we're this
Well,
big humanity thing, but on the other hand we're this individual. And it's hard to kind of have both. But I was thinking about it. Like we look at some organisms, like a hive of bees or something like that, or a bunch of bacteria, and we think like, oh, that's like one colony.
uh,
But we don't really look at humanity as one colony. But then I was thinking, if alien life comes and takes a look at humanity on Earth and looks at it as a colony, they'll be like, well, what does that colony do? And they're like, well, it just deposits plastic wherever it goes.
yeah,
Like
right.
maybe that's like the purpose of existence is just depositing plastic all over the place.
Or maybe well, actually, if they did look at it, they might just see like, it might be like, we might look like a bunch of like bee colonies. Like we have
Hmm.
all these different like little kind of groups that seem to be working together more or less. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Yeah, identity's tough. I don't know. It's like, I think this is the problem with human. Like, again, consciousness is tough, right? And being human is tough because I think it's like we
Well,
get this skewed perspective on things sometimes. We can't know things as they really are. We can only see it from our perspective. So,
and identity is something that's always shifting because initially it doesn't exist at all. And then throughout the course of your life, it changes over and over again. And then it vaporizes at the end of your life. So what essentially is it?
well, that's it, right? It's like,
Hmm.
again, yeah. Oh,
Cool. Well, there you have it. The answers to 10 philosophical questions. You should consider yourself a philosophical genius
there
by
you
this point.
go.
Yeah. If you enjoyed this episode, we have hundreds of others on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, this is the Existential Stoic Podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll catch you later, Danny.
Later, Andy.
Sweet.